Car dealership manager kicks out J.D. Vance over MAGA hat. What he does next will shock you. The sleek glass doors of Prestige Motors slid open, ushering in the morning air. Located in a bustling downtown district, this upscale dealership catered to an exclusive clientele, offering luxury cars in a sophisticated, polished environment. The showroom exuded elegance, from the gleaming floors to the high-end vehicles on display. It was a place where the affluent came not just for a car, but for an experience, a symbol of success. Overseeing every transaction was Tom Preston, the meticulous manager. In his mid-40s, with salt and pepper hair and a sharp suit, Preston had built Prestige Motors into a beacon of luxury. He prided himself on creating a professional atmosphere that upheld the dealership's reputation for exclusivity and discretion. But on this particular morning, the dealership's polished image would be tested. J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States, entered the showroom. His authoritative presence was clear, but it was the red MAGA hat on his head that caught Preston's attention. The bold slogan stood out starkly against the sleek surroundings, a symbol of political division. In the refined space of Prestige Motors, where neutrality was key, the hat felt out of place. Preston's unease grew. The slogan had become a polarizing symbol, and in this environment, it felt like an intrusion. After a moment of hesitation, Preston took a deep breath and approached. "Vance." "Sir," Preston said, his voice firm, "I'm going to have to ask you to remove that hat or leave. It's not in line with the atmosphere we maintain here." Vance, caught off guard by the sudden confrontation, paused for a moment before responding. The air in the showroom seemed to thicken, and all eyes subtly shifted in their direction. This was no ordinary customer. This was the Vice President of the United States. Yet Preston's words hung heavy, the weight of their meaning unmistakable. J.D. Vance stood still for a moment, the weight of Preston's words sinking in. The hum of the air conditioning, the quiet murmur of the staff, and the distant sound of a customer inspecting a vehicle all seemed to fade into the background. He had faced plenty of scrutiny in his political career, but this was different. This was personal. Vance adjusted the red MAGA hat on his head, a habit he'd long developed whenever he wore it in public. To him, the hat symbolized more than a slogan. It represented a movement, a set of values, and perhaps most importantly, a statement of defiance in a polarized world. But here, in the luxury showroom of Prestige Motors, that statement seemed to clash against the carefully curated environment Preston had built. Preston was standing a few feet away, his arms crossed, looking every bit the businessman in his tailored suit. His face was tense, and there was an unmistakable coolness in his demeanor. He didn't raise his voice, but there was an undeniable force in his words. "I'm sorry, sir, but I must ask you to remove that hat or leave the premises," he said again, his voice calm but resolute. "We strive to maintain a respectful environment for all of our customers here, and that hat doesn't fit with the image we want to project." Vance raised an eyebrow. He had encountered pushback before. He was, after all, the Vice President of the United States, and his political beliefs were hardly a secret. But he wasn't accustomed to being confronted so abruptly in a public space, especially one as high-end as Prestige Motors. For a brief moment, he considered the irony of the situation. A man who had risen to the highest levels of American politics, standing in a showroom where a symbol of his beliefs was unwelcome. "I'm afraid I can't do that," Vance responded, his voice steady and firm. "I wear this hat because it means something to me. It represents a part of who I am. I'm not here to cause trouble or disrupt your business, but I will not be silenced." The tension in the air was palpable. Preston's eyes narrowed as he met Vance's gaze, his jaw clenching. "It's not about silencing you, Mr. Vance," he replied. "It's about creating an environment where everyone feels comfortable." You may not see it, but that hat represents a division, an ideology that is far from universal. Not everyone in this showroom shares your views, and I'd prefer to avoid any conflict. Vance inhaled deeply, feeling a surge of frustration. He understood Preston's perspective, at least on the surface. The hat was polarizing. He knew that. But to him, it was more than just a symbol of a political movement. It was an emblem of personal expression. It was the kind of defiance that America had once prided itself on. The freedom to wear what you wanted, say what you wanted, and be who you were without judgment. I understand you want to maintain a certain image for your business, Vance said slowly. But the idea that this hat is the problem, that it's somehow offensive to people, that's something I can't accept. I'm not here to disrupt your business, but I won't be treated as if my beliefs have no place here. The exchange continued for a few more moments, each word charged with tension, neither man willing to back down. Preston glanced over his shoulder at a couple of employees who were watching the confrontation unfold, their expressions uneasy. It was clear that they were unsure of what was happening, unsure whether to intervene or remain silent. Finally, Vance broke the silence. Look, I'm not here to make a scene. If you insist, I'll leave. But I'm not removing the hat. I'm not ashamed of it. With a small nod, Preston stepped aside, allowing Vance to pass. The vice president, without further comment, turned and made his way toward the door, his footsteps echoing in the otherwise silent showroom. The door swung open, and he paused for a moment on the threshold, taking a deep breath of fresh air before stepping outside. It didn't take long for word to spread. The moment Vance exited the dealership, several people in the showroom had already taken out their phones to snap pictures. Within minutes, the story was making its way through social media, accompanied by hashtags like MAGA incident and Knox free speech. The reactions were swift and, as expected, divided. Supporters of Vance, particularly those who had rallied around him in his political career, rallied to his defense. How dare they treat the vice president like this? One tweet read, "This is America. Wear what you want. Their free speech." Others voiced similar sentiments, condemning Preston's actions as politically biased and a violation of Vance's right to express himself freely. On platforms like Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, the story gained traction quickly, with users sharing their outrage and flooding Prestige Motors' social media accounts with messages of condemnation. As expected, the story quickly caught the attention of the media. News outlets scrambled to cover the incident, and what had begun as a minor dispute in a luxury car dealership turned into a full-fledged media frenzy. The story became a headline on cable news channels, with pundits on both sides of the political spectrum offering their takes. Some saw it as a blatant attack on free speech, while others viewed it as a necessary stance to uphold civility in a divided political climate. For Preston, the backlash was immediate and intense. The dealership's phone lines were flooded with calls, many of them angry, some even threatening. One particularly irate caller demanded to speak directly to Preston, accusing him of silencing dissent and catering to the elites. Preston listened in silence, absorbing the barrage of criticism, but the media's coverage was just as relentless. News anchors debated whether Preston's decision was an appropriate response, while commentators on both sides dissected the larger implications of the incident. Was it a business decision, a political statement, a violation of free speech? The questions kept coming. As the backlash intensified, Preston found himself increasingly isolated. He couldn't help but question his own decision. At first, his stance had felt justified. He was protecting the image of his dealership, ensuring that it remained a space where people could escape the divisiveness of the political world. But now, with the flood of criticism and the media frenzy surrounding the incident, he began to wonder if he had made a mistake. Preston prided himself on being impartial. He had always maintained that Prestige Motors was a place for everyone, regardless of political beliefs, race, or background. His customers were wealthy and powerful, but they all shared a common interest in the luxury cars that lined the showroom. The dealership had no place for politics, no room for ideological division, or so he had thought. But now, as he sat in his office, scrolling through the endless stream of messages pouring in, he couldn't shake the feeling that his own political beliefs were influencing his actions. He was a liberal, sure, he had never hidden that, but had his personal biases clouded his judgment? Had he made an unfair call based on his discomfort with the symbol of the hat rather than what was best for his business? He wasn't sure anymore. The lines between his personal beliefs and his professional obligations had become dangerously blurred. The guilt was starting to gnaw at him. One thing was clear: this wasn't going to be an easy situation to undo. J.D. Vance sat in front of his laptop in a quiet office, the soft hum of the city outside his window barely audible. His fingers hovered above the keys as he prepared to respond to the controversy that had erupted in the wake of the incident at Prestige Motors. The situation had escalated quickly. What had begun as a minor dispute in a luxury car dealership had snowballed into a national debate on free speech and political expression. Vance wasn't one to shy away from confrontation, especially when it came to defending what he believed in. But as he thought about the exchange with Preston, he realized this wasn't just about the MAGA hat. It was about something deeper: the right to express oneself, especially in a society that had grown increasingly polarized. He clicked record on his phone and positioned it in front of him. For a moment, he stared into the camera, his usual confident demeanor tempered by a hint of contemplation. Then, in a calm, measured tone, he began to speak. "Earlier today, I was asked to leave a car dealership because of the hat I was wearing. It's a hat that's become a symbol of political division, I know that, but it's also something personal to me, a reminder of what I stand for. When I put on this hat, I'm reminded of the movement that many of us believe in, a movement that calls for a return to values that many of us hold dear. For me, it's a sign of my commitment to our country, to our people." He paused, looking directly into the camera. "But that's not the point. The point is this. I was asked to remove it, not because of anything I did or said, but because of a symbol that represents a segment of America, a segment that is constantly told it doesn't belong in certain spaces, that it's unwelcome. And I refuse to accept that." Vance's voice remained steady, but there was an unmistakable edge to it. "This isn't just about a hat. It's about something much larger, about freedom of expression. Whether it's in a car dealership or anywhere else, every American should have the right to express their political views without fear of discrimination or exclusion. We live in a country where people are supposed to be free to speak their minds, to wear what they want, to stand for what they believe in. And if we continue down a path where that's not possible, where people are silenced because of their beliefs, we've lost something fundamental about what makes this country great." He leaned forward slightly. "I challenge Prestige Motors and its management to reconsider their stance, because this isn't just about me. It's about all of us, and about ensuring that every person, regardless of political affiliation, has a seat at the table. I won't be silenced, and neither should anyone else." Vance finished the video with a final, deliberate glance at the camera. "I'll leave it at that, but I hope this serves as a reminder that we can't let divisive forces define us. It's time for a more civil dialogue, a more respectful conversation, a more inclusive America." With a deep breath, he ended the video, his finger hovering over the post button. His mind was clear. This was the right thing to do. He hit post. Within moments, his followers on social media began flooding in with support. Likes, shares, and comments poured in by the thousands. They rallied around Vance, condemning the treatment he had faced and affirming his right to express his views. Openly, some even took to the dealership's own social media pages, filling the comment section with messages of solidarity for Vance and demanding an apology from the business. The viral post continued to build momentum, pushing the controversy into the national spotlight. As the evening drew on, the flood of responses didn't slow down. Tom Preston sat at his desk, his head in his hands, staring at his phone. The notification bell seemed relentless, messages, emails, and phone calls from every direction. Some praised him for standing firm in his principles. Others accused him of intolerance and silencing free speech. The comments were polarizing. Some said Vance had been treated unjustly. Others believed Preston had made the right call to protect the dealership's image. But what struck Preston the most was the sheer number of messages questioning his motives. People weren't just disagreeing with his actions, they were questioning his integrity, his values. The pressure was mounting, and it was hard for Preston to keep up with the whirlwind he had unwittingly set in motion. He wasn't used to being in this position. His entire career had been built on maintaining a level of professionalism, on balancing business with neutrality. But now, the neutrality he had prized so much seemed like a distant memory. He found himself questioning his own beliefs. Was his decision truly about maintaining an appropriate business environment, or had his personal political biases led him to make a rash, unfair judgment? Late that night, as he scrolled through the endless stream of messages, Preston's phone rang. It was an old friend, Laura, a political commentator who had worked alongside him years ago. She had always been someone Preston trusted for advice, especially in matters of politics and ethics. "Hey, Tom, I've been following this whole thing," Laura said, her voice calm but with an edge of concern. "I know this isn't easy, but you need to take a step back and think about what's really going on here." "I'm just trying to run a business, Laura," Preston replied, his voice tinged with frustration. "I didn't want to make a political statement. I felt like that hat wasn't the kind of message we want in the dealership." "I get it," Laura responded, her tone softening. "But think about it. What you did was more than just rejecting a symbol. You're telling people that their political expression isn't welcome. It's about more than you and Vance. It's about the message you're sending to anyone who might feel like their views are unwelcome in the spaces they walk into. You're effectively saying that freedom of speech has limits, and those limits are defined by the people who hold the power." Preston sat back in his chair, processing her words. He hadn't considered it from that angle. "So, you're saying I overstepped?" "I'm saying you need to think about whether your decision was driven by your personal biases, or whether it was truly about what's best for the business," Laura replied. "You need to ask yourself, is this a moment where you can do the right thing, or will you let it pass because you're too proud to admit you were wrong?" The conversation hung in the air like a weight. Preston felt the truth of Laura's words, a sharp contrast to the certainty he had felt earlier in the day. He had to make a decision. After hours of pacing, reading through the comments, and reflecting on his conversation with Laura, Preston made up his mind. He couldn't allow his personal politics to define his business. The fallout from the incident had made it clear that what he had done was not just about maintaining a neutral space. It was about denying someone's right to express themselves. It was about silencing voices, and that was something he couldn't stand behind. The next morning, Preston sat down at his desk, a blank page in front of him. Slowly he began to type, "Dear valued customers and friends of Prestige Motors, in the past 24 hours I have been forced to reflect deeply on my actions and the recent incident involving Vice President J.D. Vance. After much thought, I realize that my decision to ask Mr. Vance to leave the dealership was influenced by personal biases and not by the principles of fairness and respect that I strive to uphold. I have always believed in creating an environment where all people, regardless of their political beliefs or affiliations, can feel comfortable. In this case, I failed to live up to those values. Our dealership is a space for all voices, and it was wrong for me to impose my personal views on a public figure who has every right to express himself as he sees fit. I want to publicly apologize to Mr. Vance and to anyone else who may have felt unwelcome or silenced by my actions. I understand the importance of political expression, even in private spaces, and I am committed to fostering a more inclusive, respectful dialogue going forward. To Mr. Vance, I invite you to return to Prestige Motors for a conversation where we can discuss our differences openly, with the respect that every person deserves. Sincerely, Tom Preston, Manager, Prestige Motors. He hit send, feeling a mixture of relief and vulnerability, but he knew it was the right thing to do. A few days after Tom Preston's public apology, the air at Prestige Motors felt a little lighter. Despite the ongoing scrutiny from the public and media, Preston found himself more at peace, knowing that he had done the right thing. His decision to publicly acknowledge his mistake had been a difficult one, but it had created an opportunity for real dialogue, something he had initially feared. When Vance agreed to meet him, Preston couldn't help but feel a wave of nervous anticipation. It wasn't every day that you invited a sitting vice president into your dealership, let alone one who had become the focal point of a national controversy. Yet, in this moment, it felt right. It felt necessary. The day of the meeting arrived, and Vance entered Prestige Motors with a calm demeanor. He wasn't wearing his MAGA hat this time, though he had made no secret of his beliefs in the past. Both men shook hands, their previous confrontation hanging in the air between them like a distant memory. This was about moving forward, about finding common ground. "Thank you for extending the invitation, Mr. Preston," Vance said, smiling warmly. "I appreciate the chance to have this conversation." "Of course," Preston replied, leading him toward a small conference room in the back of the dealership. "I think it's important we talk, on both a personal and professional level. I've learned a lot over the past few days." They sat down across from each other, both men maintaining eye contact, but neither quite sure where to start. Vance broke the silence first. "You know, I've been thinking a lot about this whole situation. I won't lie, it was frustrating to be asked to leave your dealership. But I also understand the importance of creating an atmosphere where people feel comfortable, no matter their views. What I've realized is that these symbols, like the MAGA hat, mean different things to different people. It's powerful, yes, but it can also divide." Preston nodded thoughtfully, his brow furrowed. "That's something I've had to come to terms with. I was quick to assume that the hat symbolized something only divisive, but I've learned that it's not just a symbol of politics, it's a symbol of identity for some people, like yourself. And while I may not agree with everything it represents, I see now that it's important to recognize the deeper meaning behind it." There was a pause, both men contemplating the weight of the conversation. After a few moments, Preston spoke again, more openly than before. "I think what bothered me most was that I acted out of instinct," he admitted. "I've spent so much of my life trying to maintain a neutral space, especially in a business like this, but I realize now that neutrality sometimes becomes a shield for avoiding the real conversations. And I was so focused on preserving that image that I didn't stop to think about how my decision might have affected you, or anyone else who shares your perspective." Vance sat back, his gaze steady but understanding. "It's a complicated issue, for sure. I think we've lost the ability to have conversations across political lines without immediately resorting to judgment or anger. That's something I've tried to fight for, even as I've faced my own fair share of criticism." As they continued their conversation, it became clear that both men were slowly but surely finding common ground. While their political ideologies remained far apart, they began to understand the importance of maintaining respect for differing opinions. Preston, in particular, came to realize that symbols in politics, like the MAGA hat, held significant weight beyond mere partisanship. For some, it represented empowerment, a sense of pride in their identity, and a desire for change. For others, it was a reminder of divisiveness and exclusion. It wasn't as simple as right or wrong, it was complex and layered. "I think one of the things I underestimated," Preston said after a pause, "was how important it is to give people the space to express themselves, even if their views make me uncomfortable. I've spent too much time worrying about the image of this business, when the real focus should be on the relationships we build with people. I should have been more open to hearing you out." Vance smiled. "I respect that. It's not easy. But real progress comes from setting aside labels and listening to each other." Their conversation was filmed for the dealership's social media and quickly went viral. The footage showcased a respectful, genuine exchange between the two men. Far removed from their initial tension, both Vance and Preston were praised for engaging in a mature dialogue, and the video sparked widespread admiration across the political spectrum. As the public reaction shifted, media outlets began focusing on the positive resolution. The story evolved from a confrontation to an example of how opposing views could lead to meaningful conversations. Commentators hailed it as a rare instance of civility amid the country's polarized discourse. Many re-evaluated their initial harsh judgment of Preston's actions, acknowledging his humility in apologizing and seeking understanding. For Vance, the experience further solidified his reputation as a figure who could engage in civil discourse, transcending partisan divides to promote a more constructive national conversation. The meeting between Vance and Preston sparked a wider conversation about political expression, the power of symbols, and the need for respectful dialogue in a divided society. People began questioning their own biases and whether they could engage in more civil conversations despite their differences. Both men left Prestige Motors with a deeper understanding and a shared desire for more inclusive dialogue. Tom Preston realized that maintaining neutrality didn't mean excluding others' perspectives, and the dealership embraced this new approach. The slogan, "Respecting all voices, every choice," was introduced, reflecting a commitment to inclusivity and free expression. At first, some questioned whether this new direction could sustain the dealership's exclusivity, but over time, the response was overwhelmingly positive. Customers valued the openness, and Prestige Motors became a place where differing political beliefs could coexist without animosity. The dealership and its customers had learned to engage through dialogue, not division. Meanwhile, Vance continued to champion civil discourse and understanding, using his platform as vice president to encourage more respectful conversations across the political spectrum. He saw the Prestige Motors incident as a turning point in his own journey of leadership, a reminder that the way forward in a divided world wasn't through further division, but through connection. The idea of finding common ground with those who might seem ideologically opposed had always been an underlying principle in his personal politics, but this experience gave him a deeper appreciation for the complexity of the task. As he traveled across the country, Vance incorporated the lessons from his meeting with Preston into his speeches and interactions. He talked about the importance of listening, of stepping outside one's comfort zone to understand another person's point of view, even if it meant challenging deeply held beliefs. He acknowledged that the polarization in American politics wasn't going to disappear overnight, but he also emphasized that it was possible to bridge those divides if people were willing to take the first step. In private, Vance kept in touch with Preston, exchanging messages of encouragement and checking in on how the dealership's rebrand was going. There was a mutual respect that had developed between the two men, built on the understanding that while they may never fully agree on every issue, they could agree on the importance of dialogue and respect for individual expression. Months later, Vance returned to Prestige Motors, not as vice president but as a customer. He had been eyeing a luxury sedan and chose to return to the dealership for both personal and symbolic reasons. Tom Preston greeted him with a warm smile. "Didn't expect you back so soon," he said. Vance shook his hand. "I figured it was time. Plus, I need a car." Preston led Vance to the sleek black car, and Vance complimented the dealership's rebranding. "It really seems like you value all voices here, just like you promised." Preston smiled. "It's been a process, but we're focused on creating an environment where everyone feels heard." Vance nodded. "You've made real change. It'll resonate with people." The tension between the two men was gone, replaced by mutual respect. They didn't agree on everything, but their differences were no longer a barrier, just an opportunity for growth. After finalizing the paperwork, Preston extended his hand. "Thanks for coming back, it means a lot." Vance grinned. "It's been a pleasure, and I think this is just the beginning if we keep talking." As Vance left with his new car, he felt a sense of accomplishment. Not only had he secured a new vehicle, but he'd also helped foster a change in how people approached political disagreements. The sleek car was a symbol of a new chapter in his life, one focused on unity, not division. In the weeks that followed, news outlets shared the positive resolution with praise from both sides of the political spectrum. The story was a reminder that even in a divided world, understanding and dialogue were possible. The reconciliation between Vance and Preston wasn't a cure for all political divides, but it showed that through conversation and respect, people could build something better together. A powerful lesson for today's polarized world.